Hello everyone, I'm back on campus at Princeton, as you can see by this very standard issue dorm room furniture. Today I want to be talking about Euphoria, specifically the part 1 and part 2 episodes that were released in December and January that deals with Rue and Jules and their account of the events that happened in season 1. So I really liked these two special episodes, maybe even a little bit more than the entirety of season 1. Like some people called these episodes a little bit boring because it lacked like the super intense cinematography and the lighting, but I found it extremely fascinating. Both episodes were like filmed during the quarantine period, and so obviously they had to have a more limited crew on set, and so they really dive into like the characters' feelings and like hone in on like the emotionality and like how the characters feel on the moment. They really like linger on the tension of like what they're going through right now. So I thought they would provide a very like complicated and nuanced view on addiction slash trans slash queer identity. And I think both episodes really opened up my mind to like the issues that both characters face. So I guess I'll just briefly talk about part 1, but I'll be mostly focusing on part 2 because it's more recent in my memory. But part 1 was really amazing, and like I love Zendaya. She's so talented. The acting was incredibly phenomenal from her and the co-star Coleman. And I don't know, I think it's just very clear that Sam Levinson, the show creator, put a lot of his own experience with addiction into it. It's almost like peeking into a conversation that we don't normally get to hear. And I don't know, I feel like the journey of like really hating yourself and feeling the despair and the journey to get clean, like these are all things that the episode really covered well. I especially like how they tackled the idea that like she has some kind of like healthy emotional balance between drugs and her daily life, but like Ali accurately points out that she's really just protecting herself from the pain of changing, because it can be really difficult to change, and it's much easier to convince yourself that you are like, you know, doing okay while being addicted, but that's not necessarily true, as Ali points out. And I also really like how they challenge this idea that it's like when you're fighting addiction, you're not only fighting like the like disease of addiction, but you're also trying to fight the message that we as a society and like people by and large have internalized, that it's your fault and you've messed up if you're addicted, and that you are a bad person for doing all these things that you did when you were under the influence, or when you were recovering, or when you were going through a relapse. And it's nearly impossible to recover when you feel that it is your fault and not like the addiction that is the root of the problem. But that's like how people tend to view addiction, and it makes recovery even harder. And I also like how they talk about like loving yourself versus getting into a relationship. I especially like the cameo from the like person working at the diner who was like, you can love someone and you can also get clean, but you can't do both. Yeah, so I just love how Ollie sees right through her, and I hope that this like dynamic and these characters continue on to season 2, because I would love to see like more conversations that really like hone in on a specific character and what they're feeling. Part 2, I like loved this episode. I think it was a really wonderful explanation of like trans and queer identity, and I'm not trans and I don't claim to know what it's like to be fully, but I think this episode really illuminated some like interesting tensions. Like for instance, when Jules talks about wanting to get hormones and take off blockers, it provides a more nuanced and complicated view of gender. I feel like when people, I guess when society, or like when I see discourse about trans identity, people are like, oh yes, like transitions from A to B, and it's like what people feel mentally but aren't physically. And I think gender and people's perceptions of gender are a lot more complicated than that. And also like, just because you've transitioned to a certain level, it's like, oh yes, you're stuck at being a female and you can never detransition, or your perception of your own gender will never change. But that's not necessarily true, as like Jules' character points out. And I think Hunter Schafer herself said in a post-episode interview that like she was encouraged to write about gender from a philosophical view of it, and I think that's that comes across a lot in the episode.
I definitely felt a little complicated at first about having Jules kind of really elaborate on where she's at with gender and sexuality. If I've learned anything from being trans for my whole life, it's that, you know, that spiral kind of never stops.
So I love that she like put a more nuanced view in it, and I love that she also co-wrote this. From the dialogue, you can really tell that like she was writing from a place like rooted in her own view and her own experience of trans identity and thinking through gender and all the issues that she's grappling with. I also saw from an interview that Hunter like contributed to the storyboarding of the episode, and I think it's also very apparent from the cinematography and filming of it. I know that she's also like a visual artist, so you could tell from like the scene where like the wave crashes over her, or like the way that she's like looking back, and then like Tyler is fading away, but Rue is also like coming in and out. Like these are all very like visually interesting like camera transitions, and I think that like Hunter's input like definitely comes across. I really felt like this episode was like I was a fly on the wall and like Jules' therapy session, and it felt a little voyeuristic. I found the one part where she said this was her first therapy session with this therapist a little interesting, because usually like when you have your first therapy session, it's usually an intake session, so you know you go over like the basics of your background or like what you came in for, but they were like really diving in on some like deep hard-hitting stuff, and the therapist seemed to know a lot about her, so I was just very surprised. It was like their first session, especially because first like sessions don't normally last like more than an hour and a half, and like they really seemed to be getting into it. But I understand why they said it was the first session just for the sake of like the episode, but that part really made me chuckle. Yeah, and I also really relate to Jules saying that she's over men. Yeah, I like how you could like finally see Jules' side of the story and all that she has been dealing with, and like, you know, obviously Euphoria is centered on Rue and her perception of the world and her experiences, but I love that we have like a Jules focused episode, and there's so much more going on to her, and her view of like Rue is also tangled up with her view of her mother, who she like does not want to talk about, does not want to interact with, and that really creates some complicated feelings for her. So yeah, I think this episode tackles themes of like, you know, not wanting to forgive, but also like trying to open yourself up to love and new possibilities. And I really relate to Jules when she said that like it was hard to believe someone would love you that much in real life, because you know when you are struggling with your self-perception, it's really hard to believe that like someone else will love you the same way that you intensely love someone else, and it's like surprising and incredibly healing and incredibly scary when someone does. Also that she's still dealing with the trauma of like Tyler not turning out to be Tyler and turning out to be like catfished by Nate. Yikes. I also love that in the credits I saw that they had worked with an intimacy coordinator, and I find it kind of amusing that they hired an adult film actor to play Tyler, but I think it adds like the fantasy element of like how like Jules has like romanticized the element of intimacy and love in her head, and like she says that like real life is a letdown, and I feel like that kind of comes across in the episode. I like how this episode deals with a lot of like contradictory events and feelings. I love the format of both these episodes, and I hope the show keeps elements of this for season 2, because like as much as I love like the crazy cinematography and the costuming and the makeup, which I think there's a little bit of it in this episode because like Hunter's character is very fashion forward. I would love to see like more episodes in season 2 also like dive in very closely on like one particular scene and like how they feel about it, how they feel about a certain topic. It almost feels like theatrical, like a play. Like usually when you see plays, like scenes are long, but in TV shows, like scenes are very short. So I would love to see like longer scenes and longer conversations between characters. Yeah, and I hope like in general maybe TV like starts doing this more, where they like, you know, allow for more deep focused conversations and experiences like this. Like I said, I love how the show goes against what we might expect from preconceived notions of attraction, love, gender, and addiction, and I think that's what makes the writing in these episodes particularly powerful. Like Rue understands that she's hurting people, but she also doesn't love herself, and she has made steps to get clean but doesn't actually want to get clean, and she really respects Ollie, and Ollie is like going through his own stuff. So there's a lot of contradictions in part 1, and part 2 is also the same. Like Jules loves Rue, but she also like Rue makes her so angry, and Jules like, you know, feels trans but has gained a more evolved sense of gender. And usually when people say like, oh my gosh, like she's going off blockers, like does that mean she's really trans? And like obviously the way Jules talks about it and like Hunter has written the episode, like the answer is yes. She still is trans, she still has a complicated view of gender and is just constantly evolving. And then femininity is not like a strict construct, it's more like a philosophical approach and something that she feels internal. She says like her transness is something that she owns for herself. So I just love that there are like these contradictions in the episode that feel even more real. And I think in general, like I had a creative writing teacher junior year that said like in writing you're aiming to like name the unnameable, and I feel like this episode succeeds in naming the unnameable really well. So I guess this is just like a very long rant of why I loved part 1 and part 2, and I hope they like continue this format in some form in season 2. I'm really excited to see what like Euphoria does next because I have really come to love the show and the characters. So yes, they are living rent-free in my mind, as the kids say these days. Yeah, so I guess thanks for watching and listening to me ramble on about Euphoria. If you like this video, just like leave a comment or like it, and maybe I'll make more of these like really long rambly videos. Otherwise, just thanks for watching, and see you later.